Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Sheeter. I'm a principal transportation planner and multimodal design lead at the City of Boulder, and I'm here with Michael Koslow. He's a senior project manager in the Capital Projects Division, also at the City of Boulder, and we're both with the Transportation and Mobility Department. And we're here to tell you, like the intro said, to tell you about how we implemented the first protected bike lane in the US on Baseline Road. Using an innovative material called a tall curb, or a 18-inch high precast concrete tall curb. And in this picture, we did that even though 1 year later, a few drivers haven't gotten used to them yet. So we'll first tell you a little bit of background about the project, followed by the design approach, and then get into how the team implemented the improvements and some lessons learned now that we've had some time to reflect. So why Baseline? It ultimately came down to two things. We had a new city council majority that was elected in 2022, and Baseline Road was a planned repaving project, and those two forces kind of combined. And starting with the repaving, Baseline Road is this heavily traveled arterial, kind of in the southeast of town at the corner of CU Boulder's main campus. And it was in poor condition, so it was identified for repaving through our pavement management program. And around the time that identification occurred, we had a newly elected city council, and they directed staff to advance a network of arterial street redesign projects to improve safety for everyone that uses them. This was informed by the city's commitment to Vision Zero, and through that initiative, we do regular crash analysis, and that data has shown that arterials make up only 17% of the streets in the city, but they are where 67% of the serious injury and fatal crashes occur. So the council directed core arterial network. The map of that network is on the left-hand side of the slide. That proposes to build a connected system of protected bike lanes, intersection improvements, pedestrian and transit facility upgrades on the arterial streets, the city's most dangerous streets. From a bike network perspective, many of the corridors would close key gaps in the bike network by providing safe and comfortable facilities on these higher speed, higher traffic streets. And in doing so, we hope to have an outsized impact on reaching Vision Zero, since those are where a disproportionate number of crashes occur. And so Baseline Road, which is kind of at the south part of that citywide map, highlighted in yellow, was selected as a priority due to its function connecting student housing to CU's main campus and East Campus, and the adjacent neighborhoods to shopping centers at either end of the corridor, in addition to that repaving project I mentioned. So that was an opportunity for us to coordinate improvements and really put the street back in a slightly different configuration and a safer configuration in coordination with the milling and overlay work that was planned for the summer of 2023. And so we had a very tight timeline between the prioritization in 2022 and that repaving work that was planned for 2023. And that meant the project had to follow really a new model for us in the city for design development and community engagement. And that was a really streamlined approach, since we really had about a year from project identification to get to final design and be ready for implementation. And that meant blended teams of in-house planners and engineers across our divisions. I sit in the planning division, the transportation planning division, Michael in the capital projects group. We also partnered with our operations division, and maintenance divisions. And that kind of pace and that blended team was kind of a new model for project delivery in Boulder, as opposed to much longer planning phases for projects and more external support. We did have some limited consultant support as part of the project, but it was very light given the limited resources that we had. And so here's a photo of what Baseline looked like before, looking kind of west towards the mountains. It's a high-speed multi-lane arterial, like I mentioned, with, at the time, buffered, and in some places where the plows hadn't knocked them over, post-separated bike lanes, which you can't really see in the picture because I think here they were kind of scraped off, and and it was just paint separating the travel lanes from the bike lane. The posted speed limit was about 40 miles an hour, 35 to 40 miles an hour, but prevailing speeds, 85th percentile speeds, were in some cases 45 plus. And so the goal was, informed by a number of plans, transportation master plan, low stress walk and bike network plan, as well as community input that had a desire for safer bike facilities, to make those near-term safety improvements to reduce vehicle speeds and enhance the safety and comfort of those existing bike lanes. So due to the speed and volume of traffic on baseline and the city's desire for that connected network that cyclists of all ages and abilities could utilize to kind of get where they need to go, hardened vertical separation, more than just those few flex posts or plastic posts that were still there, would be needed. And so these figures illustrate how the existing configuration did not meet those goals. Baseline is actually off the chart on that right-hand image, with vehicles per day approaching 15,000 plus, and speeds over 40 miles an hour. So that guidance, that national best practice, really points you towards protected bike lanes or some other kind of off-street facility. And so an initial step of the design process was a comprehensive evaluation of potential vertical separation elements. And these ranged from cast-in-place concrete curbs to more modular elements like planter boxes and rubber wheel stops. We were looking at, not just US cities, but Canadian cities as well for best practices, NACTO guidance, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. And we really brought that all together for a more detailed evaluation and consideration by the team. And so we also had to consider that much of Baseline Road was in the floodplain, and given the short project timeline, that meant some elements were screened out because they potentially could cause a rise in that floodplain, and we didn't have time to go through the necessary permitting for that. And so the preference was for more hardening with concrete because of the number of lanes, vehicle volumes, and speed of the roadway. So we kind of were going in that direction with the selection. And then the elements were evaluated on a range of criteria that included consideration of available project funds, safety, maintenance, and services, and some special criteria that isn't even reflected in these bullet points. But we also, given that this was adjacent to two residential neighborhoods, we also had consideration for aesthetics of whatever material we were going to put out there. And then being that we're in Colorado, snow and drainage is really key. So we wanted to consider that in the design and be sure we could maintain them, and there was an ease of maintenance there. And so that might point you to, concrete, something available, proven, might point you to more of a Jersey barrier style, but we didn't really think something like that, precast Jersey barrier, would fit kind of the context of the roadway, the adjacent neighborhoods. Also would have maintenance issues with kind of shading and snow clearing issues with that as well. And then we also were considering how the design could be adapted. So whatever elements we could put out there would be adapted to a future phase 2 project that we are just kicking off now. And Michael's the project manager on that. That has a lot more resources, multi-million-dollar project versus a $500,000 project, federally grant funded, to add additional separation and other permanent elements. So we needed to kind of future-proof this phase 1 project in anticipation for more improvements in the future. So I'll turn it over to Michael to walk you through the precast tall curb that we move forward into implementation. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so Daniel kind of alluded to, we have a lot of a why. Why did we end up with this tall curb? It's a very busy road that has the need for vertical separation. It's kind of that creamy middle between like a curb and a local street and a giant Jersey barrier on a freeway, right? So these tall curbs are kind of, I won't say ubiquitous, but they're used a lot more in Canada. Our neighbors to the north in Toronto and Vancouver are using these. And there are thousands of units on the street in Toronto today. So we kind of took our cue from what they're doing a little bit, and would say on baseline in this phase, there's about 350 units that were installed. You can see on the picture on the right, we employed some of local artists at Ink Monster to put some vinyl wrapping over them with a little bit of our Colorado landscape. So there we go. So I'm going to do this backwards and start with the implementation process and then get back to design. So you can see how there were these tall curbs that were dropped off from flatbed trucks is how they were actually installed. So getting into a little bit about what happened, how did we get those off the flatbed trucks? It started with 2 contracts. We had to have 2 what we call requests for bids. So they are, one was, hey, can you form these precast barriers, or which we were saying, tall curbs, and can you make them in imperial units, not in metric units like in Canada, and can you get them dropped off nearby? That was our first bid. So SEMA Precast won that bid. And so while they're concurrently manufacturing these, we're scrambling to beat that mill that's getting ready to resurface the pavement and get our design done so that we know exactly where they need to go. The other component, let's see, flexible traffic control. I cannot stress this enough. So SEMA got us to the point where there's, hey, these trucks are coming at 8 a.m. These trucks are coming at 1 p.m. Uh-oh, tomorrow we aren't going to have enough, so there's only going to be a truck at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So every day we had to kind of go through the schedule, what was going to happen. When are there, luckily we didn't have any events. Luckily it was kind of the heart of the CU school year. Nobody's loading in, loading out for students at Williams Village where the giant dorm is on site. And so while these were being installed, I cannot stress this enough, there was live traffic going on in the other lane. So that was definitely something that needed to be coordinated. So, and again, I kind of talked about going backwards, right? So a couple weeks before, what were we doing? We were out very much so laying out where can these go. I should have alluded to it earlier, but one of the structural recommendations our structural engineer made was that every third unit would be what's called friction pins. So that means you dowel rebar into the street, and then it kind of sticks up and gets into the barricade, so that if there is a hit, that they're tied together laterally, and they'll also provide a little bit of structural support, as we saw kind of on that first slide with the vehicle should hit. So once you put in a rebar into the street, you're kind of stuck with that location. So that's why I would not emphasize enough. Allow enough time for it. So we spent more time doing this layout than it was actually installing the tall curbs. So now that we're all done with the tall curbs, the project's done. But wait, there's more. So I don't want to do that. So you're riding along on a bike, and you get to one of these pesky side streets, and what's going to happen there? We have introduced the concept of what's called the bend out. So the bend out, you can kind of see on the picture on your left, where the bikes are riding in the kind of lighter green area. So they actually deflect away from where the vehicles are. And per our NACTO guidelines, which is the National Association of City Transportation Officials, there is a magic number of about 16 and a half feet. That means that a car can turn right, be sitting and waiting for the bike, and not be rear-ended by the next vehicle that's right behind them. So that's the goal of the bend out. And so we introduced those with signs and or flex posts and pavement markings. And here's a picture of kind of the before and after at one of the side streets. With that, again, that goal being the car can turn out of the way and mitigate what is one of our biggest crashes for bikes, that right hook crash that nobody likes to hear about. So we also had an intersection where we created what was called a dedicated intersection. This also comes from our NACTO guidance. So it's not quite a full protected intersection, but you can see we added in kind of the striping, and there are wedge elements introduced into those kind of corners that kind of compel a bike to switch course and not go straight across the intersection, but then that allows them to, in the future, be protected when we have a protected intersection. And I'm going to switch off. That's a lot of flashing back and forth. So the first of our 3 slides of lessons learned starts with public engagement. It did inform our experience, right? Whenever there's anything new, if there's a roundabout, if there's parking protected bike lane, if there's driving on the left side of the road, whatever it is, we have to have that really robust engagement campaign, make sure folks understand what they're doing. Wow, really wanted me to move faster there. So then also going beyond that typical design. So our staff at Boulder was inspired by some of the Toronto staff. We were able to understand how did they put it together there, but then also understand that concrete's really heavy, and we're not going to truck it all the way from Canada to Colorado. So we're going to have to find that local manufacturer who can fabricate the devices and not carry them thousands of miles. And going beyond typical design, so I would say what's working a year later, you could see from the first slide, they're deflecting vehicles from getting into the bike lane. That is working. So what isn't working, unfortunately, when we have snow events, and you can imagine a plow taking all that snow and putting it right against the tall curb. So what happens next in Colorado? That melts. And then what happens at night? That freezes. So we are still working on strategies to mitigate what happens during snow events. Currently, sure, you can have lots of robust staff clearing that snow, but we'd love to have a more sophisticated solution than that moving forward. So the other things I would kind of reiterate it before about the timing, allowing, so if you're deciding you want to put these in, make sure there's plenty of time to do the layout of the project. Also, what happens, you can see that picture there on your top right, when you get a space for a bike lane that's wider than 8 feet, it becomes a car lane. So we wanted to avoid that car lane, right? So sometimes we had to introduce some additional flex posts to discourage cars who say, hey, I can turn right now. But really, you shouldn't turn right because it's in a bike lane. So the other thing I would kind of, the field testing, our partners that operate transit on the same corridor at RTD kind of reminded us when the spacing was a little too close, and we had to make some adjustments there. They are our agency partners throughout the project, first and second phase. So the last lesson learned, I would kind of reiterate, it does take time. We have had the predicted conversation with people saying, hey, I'm driving, I don't like having to slow down to turn right. Like, hey, that really feels uncomfortable. And it's true, it doesn't feel like, especially if a car is coming right behind you at 40 miles an hour, it doesn't feel as comfortable. But the safety related to making sure no matter what mode you're in, however you're getting around, you should have the right to be able to get around without getting hit by somebody, is what's driving our design here. So the other thing, this research utilities early, I can't emphasize that enough. So there is if you can imagine where the vinyl wrap tall curb is there in the picture, there is a fiber optic duct bank directly underneath that in the street. So one of the things that I would strongly recommend is a utility investigation early in the design process. Luckily, our leadership was hand in hand with us, and as we were recognizing, we've got these fiber optics, maybe we shouldn't drill epoxy dowel bars into this duct bank, we had a very supportive staff at the leadership level who said, hey, why don't we do this like they do in Canada and just not do the pinning in this location? So during our second phase, which is coming up, we have the ability to do utility investigation, and I'll do it's a SU level B investigation. That's some potholing that says, how deep is that duct bank? Can we go ahead and drill those lines in, or are we in a world of hurt? So I didn't have any ending slide after this. So these are the lessons that we've learned to date and how we got to tall curb in Boulder in a matter of a short amount of time. So with that, I think, again, we're going to probably head to a break coming up. So do you want to take these off? So we get to take a break, everybody. So we'll see you all out there. Thank you.